Thank you so much, everybody. Come on in. So we seem to have on this afternoon picked all the really thorny subjects, which seem absolutely massive. Dr. Lanier, it was you who made the comment to me about how can you eat an elephant from above? You've got to start bit by bit. And I think what I'd really like to try to achieve with this conversation is, how can we break this stuff down? Because I think they can seem like absolutely huge goals. And I know, Dr. Lanier, for you, you've been working in this arena for 30 years. So can I ask you each just to give a very brief introduction and tell me what's really important to you to have talked about in this conversation? How can we set the agenda? What should we be talking about here?
Okay, I think for us as a global manufacturer of kitchenware, we are a German family business. It's important to treat our employees in the best way we can. They are our human capital, and gender equality is a very important topic, increasingly important topic for us over the last 10 years. And gender equality for us as a business, I would say, affects two, you can say actually geographies or worlds, the developing worlds with our manufacturing facilities and the developed world where gender equality also stands for, let's say, equal career opportunities for women. And I can maybe later elaborate a bit on both sides.
Fantastic. Anne-Marie, for you, where does this conversation need to begin to be useful?
Yeah, for us it's also kind of when we came to that panel today, and I'm coming from a company who is in the food business. Most of you over here are more in the technical area. So we have to deal with consumers directly, so we are a consumer company, and we are dealing with tea. And when it comes to gender, there are two coins, or two sides of one coin. And mostly we talk about what is happening over here in Europe, but for us the major issue about gender topics is in the countries of origin, because we are sourcing from 90 countries around the globe, which are more or less all developing. So when you talk about gender equality and you talk about different companies in Asia or in mainly India, Assam, you talk about Africa, you are very explicit at the end, because you talk about sexual harassment and you're not talking about verbal violence and these kind of things which we have over here. So it's always, for us as a company, it's kind of hard mindset shift to rethink what we're doing over here in Europe and what we are doing in the countries of origin. So I could talk about, these kind of things and hours, and then it comes to a point. I think the most important one is that we have strong collaboration. And these are at the point mainly in our sector, because otherwise we cannot make a change.
Thanks, Anne-Marie. Christy, what's important for you?
Well, so I work for Parkland. We're a fuel and convenience retailer. We operate in Canada, the United States, the Caribbean, and South and Central America. And I think we all know, this is not a theory anymore, we know that diverse organizations do better, make better decisions. And so what I think is so important is, what are the systemic barriers that can change to make it so women really have an opportunity at every rung up the ladder? And I like to think of it like, there's no they, it's we. It's all of us in this room and everyone we work with. We get to make the decisions about what we do in each of our businesses that can help women get, have more impact in their careers, a stronger voice in every room they're in. And so that's what's most important to me.
And Sarah, for you?
For us, we're a Swiss engineering technology company. Of course, like a lot of technology companies, we're about 21% women. And as you go up in the levels, it's less women. So we've put goals to actually increase the number of women that we have, both in our sort of senior leadership, but also giving them the opportunity with development programs to actually increase the number of women. And we're engineering, so we want to have more women engineers. I'm a software engineer, and actually attracting more engineers to that. But also for us as a company, but then forward-looking, how do you put that into education so that more girls choose engineering, for instance, as a career?
And those stereotypes start super early. I mean, I have two little girls, and I've been shocked about how fixed the system is and how fixed early their thinking becomes. Even if you're living in a household where, you're trying to make things as equal as possible, you realize the tentacles of society get in there and change that landscape, whether you like it or not. Dr. Lanier, what's important to you? I know that you've been working in this for a long time, so what do we need to be talking about now?
Thank you for dating me 30 years. So, started when I was 6. I guess my CEO was up here yesterday, Angela Lee, she's in the back there. I work for a sustainability fintech company, a tech company, and it's led by a woman and a woman of color. And it's very rare, actually, in this field. I mean, what I would like to talk about is, it seems it's because of COP, actually, climate change is sucking all the energy out of the room and all the oxygen out of the room. But actually sustainability, what we are talking about are the SDGs, and the sustainability of the SDGs are really interconnected. And I think SDG 5, specifically SDG 5, is really at the center. It is not only impacts all of the other SDGs, but it is also impacted by all the other SDGs. So when you look at how connected SDG 5 is to all of the other SDGs, it's there, front and center, whether it's on the primary side of things or on the secondary side of things. But I'd like to also talk about, when it comes to gender equality, what is the definition of gender equality? It's not about how many women you have on the board, but it's really about access. It's about fairness. It's about empowerment, and it's about opportunities for everyone.
And that's where I was going to come in next. I wanted to ask you this question. I sometimes feel a bit frustrated when I'm having conversations about gender equality, and my husband and I will quite often do battle over these conversations, in our kitchen with a glass of wine, because I realize when we're talking about things that we don't have a broad enough view of people. Never mind gender, but people. What do people need to be in place for a workplace to be safe and to help them to thrive? So I remember my husband worked in a big bank, and there was lots of things for mental health support for women when they became mums, which was fantastic. But my husband was struggling with being a new dad, and he went and said, could we have something for the dads? And they said, no. And so he started then to feed into this feeling like, hang on a second, it's not that I don't want that program to exist, but I would like it to exist for everybody. So I just wonder, do we have too narrow a lens? Do we need to think about people and not about gender?
I think it goes actually both ways. You on the one hand need to consider women at work, but also men, and how basically potentially men at home are considered by society. And it's quite interesting. When I looked at our internal numbers, about 10 years ago, we had basically at our German headquarters 1 man at taking maternity leave per year. Now the number has increased to 15. So one can see that there is a switch in society, in thinking. And I think this is a very positive development, because particularly if as a young family you want to have children, I think one parent at least for some time need to look after the child. And I think we as a business, as a company, need to put things in place to facilitate this process. And if basically the mother goes on maternity leave, I think there are a lot of things we can do to basically facilitate this time, whether it's when she comes back, part-time work. Now also through Corona, home office is obviously a huge help. And flexible working hours and holidays. And I think if you take this as a package, I think also women much appreciate that, and then have the chance also to come back and being easily integrated into the business again. And I think what I also found out, and I think various studies, myself working with many strong women in our organization, that basically once they return from maternity leave, they're actually, maybe after a 2 years period, they're actually often stronger than before, which is good for the organization, ambitious, they manage their time more effectively. And so I think the bottom line is, as an organization, we can do beyond the normal laws, we can do a lot to facilitate facilitate kind of having promoting women, but at the same time I think there needs to be a discussion what is the role of men as well, if you consider both as a family.
Absolutely. So we need to consider both sides of the coin. I don't know if anybody knows the answer to this, but in Scandinavian countries, I've noticed that the real changes happened after legislation. So I'm wondering, do we need legislation or do we need to lead in the private sector, or do we need both? Does anyone have a view on that?
Norway has a requirement for women on the board, 50% women on the board. Yet, I think when you talk about sustainability and the sustainability organizations, it's been disappointing, actually, when the heads of some of the bigger, well-known sustainability organizations like the GRI or the UPRI, TCFD, et cetera, when they have to move to the next level, they hire men. So GRI just had a new CEO, a man, a white man again, which is quite disappointing, actually, because there's a lot of women that have been working in this space for a very, very long time. And it's surprising, and it's not surprising that they haven't actually moved up to the upper echelons. But I like what you said. Can I just ask a question of you, that your organization has actually mandated that there's more women actually at the leadership level? Any other guys here where that's the case?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Go ahead. No, this is exactly what I want everybody. I told you it was therapy, and it is therapy. This is where I just sit back and I order my wine for later. No, go ahead, please.
Yeah, so I can add to that, because obviously in preparation I did some of the numbers, and over the past 10 years we basically increased the percentage of women in leadership positions, first, second, and third level, from 10 to 30%. So I think that's a great shift. Our kind of internal goal is maybe to bring it to 40% one day. But I wanted to actually answer or actually give a hint to one aspect you mentioned before, and also you said about, I think, Sweden or Norway. So in Germany, basically, legislators introduced a new law for publicly listed companies in 2015, which required publicly listed companies to have 30% of their supervisory board being composed of women, and minimum 30%. And basically, over the last 6 years, so that percentage increased from roughly 20% to now 35%. So, which I think is a great achievement. At the same time, they actually introduced a law that boards, management boards, for management boards, companies should set a voluntary target and try to follow up on this. And the consequence is today in Germany's listed companies, management boards are composed by not even 10% women, which is, I think, obviously a way too low number. And now the regulator went back and introduced a new law this year in August, which requires companies now to add more women to their boards. So I think the lessons learned from that is that I think if you want to actually achieve a massive shift, particularly at the top level, you probably need to introduce some sort of law.
Some sort of accountability system.
I'd like to jump into this, and being a woman in that area, there are two things about it. I think it's good to have this kind of quota, to be honest, because it's for a time period where we make a movement. Otherwise, you will not raise awareness, and at the end, it's about awareness. But on the other hand side, just putting some women, because you have to, on the board, and you just put them in, usually, there are two kind of topics, like human resources, because it's about humans, and sometimes it's about and it's about marketing. And because, marketing is something everybody can do, or perceives he's doing, it's not enough. I think we have to come to a point where we get the women also in the decision-making process. And most importantly, we have to build up programs to get women in the second, third, and as you mentioned, on the fourth row, because we have to make them grow into that. It doesn't make a change, if women come back after maternity leave and stop where they are. They have to go for a development, because then at the end, when it comes to the point where they have to go to the, we say the ceiling, they have to have also their own networks and their kind of way how they help each other, like the men are doing at the moment.
And it's interesting, isn't it? Because I wonder whether in the workplace, it seems to me in lots of the different industries that I work in, and I'm generalizing wildly here, so bear with me, that there is a sort of male operating system at work. And a lot of the men within that male operating system, it suits them because it makes sense. But as a woman, I come into that system and I find, well, that doesn't work for me. You know, I want to talk to you guys about therapy and vulnerability and all of these words that would be seen potentially as soft in other company. So I wonder, we like to heap a lot of responsibility on individual women to make the distance and to make the change. But there's so much work at the system level still to be done to acknowledge that the system itself is very often oriented to one way of being. Would you agree with that? Christy, you're nodding.
I would, and you know, McKinsey just came out with a study a few months ago that said that after COVID-19, or I suppose due to COVID-19, 1 in 4 women are seriously considering either downshifting their careers or leaving the workforce entirely. And there's 3 groups that are mostly impacted, and that's working moms, women of color, and women in senior executive roles. And obviously there's a ton of overlap between those 3 categories.
All the women that we desperately need to give us the idea that we need to change everything.
That's exactly right. And so, but it's because, I'm probably going to get this wrong, so I apologize if I do, but women in kind of heterosexual couples with a child under 10 through COVID had to take on even more of the home tasks and the homework. And then in addition to that, we all know during COVID, even though we were at home, we were all working more than ever, and it was crazy busy. And so then we're coming back to the office, and that crazy work thing has kept up. Plus, you have all these additional home responsibilities. And so in addition to kind of men needing to step up at home, or partners, I suppose, needing to step up at home, I think it's companies, we've learned that we can be more flexible. You need flexible hours because you have to go pick your son or your daughter up at school at 3 p.m. Okay, well, it's okay. It doesn't matter. We can talk about all of those things and be very flexible about all of those things. And what you end up having is the women who are coming back from maternity leave who are incredibly brilliant and haven't been appreciated and have so much potential to lead all of these organizations, but they're finally getting the support from an organization who appreciates and values them. And that's the big change.
So we need to have...
It's just becoming more obvious that they're getting the job done.
That's right.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, often always getting the job done. I mean, I don't know what it's like in everybody else's household, but I would say the last 18 months in my household have had some pretty fraught, pretty toxic moments. If you had a video camera in our house, there was a lot of Jerry Springer type shouting, a lot of frustration. And if I can just be really vulnerable and open, part of that is that, I run my own business. Nothing happens in my business if I don't make it happen. And when I give people work, it's really important to them. And yet I'd be there with my head in the tumble dryer for the 5th day that week, while my husband was on the corner on the 17th call of his morning. It wasn't even lunchtime yet. And my daughter would say, "My computer doesn't work, can I have a sandwich?" And I'd literally be like, oh my God, my head is gonna explode. And I would shout at them, "This is why I'm not taking over the world yet, because my head is in the tumble dryer." And so my children are used to all of this, but I watched my mum do this. I watched my mum do this 50 years ago. My mum's 77, she's still working, still supporting, still part of the support economy. And one of the things that I think I've really noticed when I've been having conversations in corporate life is that sometimes when suggestions are made about working from home and isn't it great, the answer is no, it's not great. And I want to be part of that conversation. I want to tell you it's not great before it becomes a policy. So I wonder, Sarah, if you can speak to this idea of making sure that when decisions are being made at that point, there is a really broad church in terms of people who can tell us what they need so that we don't, by mistake, end up making life difficult for men or women.
One of the things that's important is when you're going back earlier is talking about people. And one of the things that we're putting together is we're actually holding our first diversity conference next month to actually discuss the topic because we don't have the answers. Yeah. So we're actually getting a lot of colleagues around the world will come together for a virtual conference because of COVID and actually discuss what do people need and how can we make this work. I mean, not just from a gender point of view, but also we discussed race, there's ageism, other areas, LGBTQ+, making sure that we get everybody together to actually understand what are their needs to make this work going forward. So we're still in the planning process. It'll be December. I'm happy to connect with anybody that's done this before or has ideas on this, but and happy to report back afterwards.
Well, can I just say that there's a lot of, we're working with one of the biggest business management organizations, IMA, on DE&I, so the diversity, equality, inclusion area, because they recognize that this is an employment issue now, that they cannot get access to bright minds, and it doesn't matter if it's a man or a woman, but that's the issue is that they see management accounting is very much your male dominated, and they recognize if we don't get younger women actually coming through the system, then we're going to start to lose some of those bright minds. So, you know, the United States is dealing with some issues when it comes to employment, and I think other countries are as well after COVID, is that people are saying, no, forget it. But if you can be much more inclusive when it comes to the people that you want to work with you, where gender equality comes into play, giving them the support that they need to actually be a valued member of the team, I think then you'll start to see a kind of turnaround that women will start to come back because they feel not only valued but also supported. And that's what SDG number 5 is all about anyway. It's about supported. So if you read down not only the targets but the indicators, it's all about that supportive framework that's trying to be put there to support the women as they start to come through not only the employment system, but it's everything from having access to a bank account, you know, because some countries you don't have it unless your father or your brother or your son gives you a bank account. So it's all this. When I lived in the Middle East, I remember I used to have to put my father's name for everything, and he thought this was hilarious because I was 30. And he said, what do you mean you have to put my name? And I said, it's just what it says on the bank statement. And this is the culture I choose to live in. I understand that. But I remember thinking to myself, what if that was a barrier? It's not a barrier for me in the world that I work in, but what if it was a barrier? And I wanted to ask you, Anne-Marie, that this kind of conversation is a conversation that's familiar in most of the developed world, but in the developing world, there are other nuances and considerations about the roles that women and men play in those societies, and how do you as a business support that whilst also internally supporting another system which also needs changing?
This is actually a really good question, and it's different from country to country to talk about because, as you mentioned, it's about all the cultural differences, and there is not one support program and not one training or anything which we can do in Rwanda, which at the end works in Darjeeling, because the cultural difference is so much behind. So first of all, I think the key how to make it possible is you have good partners in the country where you want to change something. Because you can never go there with your German white mindset and tell the people what you're doing is not truth and it's not right. They hear that, but they go home and they change nothing. So I think it's as you said, it's about cultural differences, and the major difference is also when you go there, you are there for a couple of years and you have your Western background. If you're living there, you go perhaps for a training, but you go back to your home. So you have to get the whole family in, and you have to get the men in, you have to get the grandfathers in, because they very often are the people in the villages who have the saying at the end. So I think you have to be very careful in what you do where. And the most crucial part is to have the right partners.
And have ironclad awareness. Because I think that's at the core of so much of this, isn't it? Whether we're talking about neurodiversity, whether we're talking about gender diversity. You know, it struck me as absolutely crazy that at COP26, there was nobody signing. You know, there was I think it was the deputy Israeli energy minister had to leave. Now, my own mum wrote the Disability Access to Guide for Glasgow 25 years ago, and 25 years later, at this dynamic moment, that is frankly not good enough. So how do we grow this awareness of others outside of gender? Is it about support? Is it about consideration? I don't know the answer. I'm just happen to be looking at you, Martin, so I'm lobbing this one to you.
So sorry, can you repeat?
How do we grow this awareness of others? rather than thinking about, man, woman, how do we just think of other people as having needs and supporting those, whatever they are, whether it's somebody to sign, whether it's a wheelchair ramp, how do we just start to think outside of our own mindset?
Well, I would say it's like always in life, leading by example, and I think particularly here in this room are many important businesses, and I think we basically together have a responsibility. Apart from that, each individual can obviously make a difference and contribute. But I think we, as important organizations, have, let's say, more leverage to make people aware. And I think it's a good advice not always to wait for the politicians or regulators to make new rules, but to go ahead and lead by example. And I think from an economic point of view, that's what I was trying to say before, because we, in the end of the day, also want to earn money. I think there is a clear payback if we basically support gender equality. But clearly, we're not there yet, and it's a long way to go. But nevertheless, I feel, hopefully here, at least in the Western world, we already made up some important ground. And I think there was a previous question in the developing world. It's a totally different setup again, and definitely a challenge also to impose, let's say, our Western values and ideas to other nations, which is probably a difficult thing to do, at least in the short to medium term.
Christy, I wanted to ask you a question. Well, I'm asking it to all of you, but I'm starting with you, Christy, which is, do we have to be more honest and open about what happens when we try to change things and allow people to talk about how it makes them feel? Because when I listen to my husband and I think about how he feels, he's a mixed race man, working class stock, clawed his way up the greasy bowl, and he faces things that I can't even imagine as a white woman who has a certain amount of privilege. So I listen to him and I think, gosh, I hadn't thought of that before. And I just wonder if there is a way to be open within companies, listening to people, attending to what happens when we try to change things, and how important that everybody thinks that is.
So I think, and I'm coming at this from the perspective of a white, cisgendered, very privileged woman, and so I have a very specific perspective. I am certainly open with the women I work with about the challenges I've faced over my career and that they can expect to face. But I think the most important thing is we all have blind spots, right? So we have blind spots to how people of color are going to be treated, or how people in the LGBTQ community, disabled people. Those are all different, and I just don't know always. And so the key is to be vulnerable, to listen, and to not take it personally when someone says, hey, which I hope you're about to say.
Well, I wonder, do we ask enough questions? I'm not sure we ask the right questions sometimes, because I think we're in our mindset, aren't we? And so we don't ask the right questions. We don't think, well, hang on a second, have I thought about that person's perspective? So is it about asking the right questions? Is it about more listening? I don't know.
It's both, I think, and being open to, look, each of us are gonna mess up. And I think for the men I work with, and I don't want to speak for them. I wouldn't try in a million years, trust me. But I think men are terrified to make a mistake, right? In a meeting, they're worried they're going to say the wrong thing, and it's going to be terrible. And I think, and that's challenging. So from my perspective, I also think that when things have happened to me at work that have been troubling from a kind of misogyny or sexism perspective, it's sometimes easier to remember that 99% of the time, it's just, no one means anything malicious by it. It's the way people think, it's all of our own blind spots, and that to say something privately to that person afterwards, hey, I just noticed this, often is effective.
But being open to that feedback, I think, is really, really interesting, isn't it? Being open to that feedback. I see that you're nodding. Sarah, what would you like to add?
Well, I think we have that unconscious bias. And as you said, most of the time when you say something, you're not actually wanting to offend the other person, but actually recognizing that and starting that dialogue to sort of say, okay, how can we talk about this? Have I offended you? how do you want to discuss this, and not being afraid, because the last thing we want to do is upset people. But often unconscious bias is how we make sense of the world around us. I think it was a case I was discussing with a colleague from HR where interviewing can be done, it's now done online, so you see that much of the person. Yes. And they were hiring people, and then they came into work, and some of them were in wheelchairs.
Such a simple thing. The
exactly.
framing on a Zoom call.
Zoom call. So they'd hired the person had done the job well, because of course they've been working from home, and then suddenly they turn up at the office. And these are things where it's like, oh, and I think that's the kind of thing we've got to sort of ask those questions and maybe confront those blind spots.
And what about, Dr. Lanier, about this willingness to see ourselves as a work in progress, to constantly upskill and educate ourselves, to see those blind spots and, as my friend would say, do the work? How important is that? Is there a willingness, do you think, in workplaces to think in that sort of a way?
I am not sure. I mean, I don't think there's a straightforward answer. But I liked what some of my colleagues were saying about, we come at this as a very North American, Western European way, and frankly, we don't have all the answers. And to expect us to actually impose our ideas on others, I think this whole conference is very much about the North American and Western European context. And one of the things maybe we do need to learn is just listening and what is appropriate for where you are within the world. And I know that you've lived in the Middle East, and you could never say that what we do in London, for instance, would be actually appropriate in Qatar. That's just not the way things are. But in a previous life, I used to run the Dow Jones Sustainability Index. And one of the things that was raised at the very beginning of that, and I was also at the beginning of the GRI, was bringing in a diverse group to come in and start to talk about what is the Southern Hemisphere experience? What is women of color, women that are disabled, et cetera? What are their experiences? So you can start to come around and maybe circle the wagons around specific issues. And that makes it much more credible than for me just to say, oh, this is how it is, because I'm from Seattle, for goodness sake. What do I know what happens in Mozambique?
Yeah, absolutely. No, I understand what you're saying. I also think there's something that's really interesting as well, and this is getting pretty deep, so I don't want to spend a lot of time here, about the believability of people's experiences. And how I've noticed that when I've spoken to a lot of women, particularly in diverse cultures around the world, when they tell me how things are, I take them at their word that that is how things are, and that they know actually in their workplace or in their culture what is right for them. And I think the other side of this is changing the way we listen to remove our own biases. I just wanted to add that point in there. Can I have a very final quick thought from each of you? It's been a very lively panel. I've hugely enjoyed it. I'm very glad that I've left you with this picture of my house as being relatively mad. And I've said lots of mean things about my husband, who I promise you is a very nice man indeed. So a final thought from each of you. What have you taken away from listening at this panel today, if anything?
I think myself, again, listening to these four gracious ladies, listening always helps and brings you further. So I think when we have also internally now in our business these conversations, bring actually also more women on the table to make these important decisions if they are not already at the table. Anne-Marie,
for you.
Building on that, I think it's important to listen, but out of the listening there must be some learnings, and they must go into action. And this is the thing, which is I'm not a fan of KPIs and all that stuff. So I'm more the person who say, let's go into projects, let's support women, let's try. And first of all, also all the women in the room over here, let's support each other and help each other and network on this one, because we women are not good at this. We are not as good as men are.
I'm just going to do a little clap there, because I thoroughly agree with that. Yeah, we have something to learn there, definitely, in the networking
it's
side of things.
It's not only the man. It's not man against woman. It's together.
It's together, absolutely. And what we can learn from each other to move the needle. Christy, for you, what's your final thought?
Yeah, I agree with that entirely. But I would also say, creating diverse organizations and diverse teams doesn't generally happen by accident. It needs to be intentional, and but it's possible, and it's so rewarding, and so be intentional about it, and yeah.
Sarah, how about you?
I think about the humility of actually addressing the blind spots. You mentioned blind spots, and I think actually openly discussing them and actually listening to different people's viewpoints is really important.
Dr. Lanier, for you?
Mine is, we started this, you started coming in, as you came in, you said, the time of speaking is over, the time of doing is here. And what I got out of this conversation actually is that hiring women and raising women up to the top tiers is a disruptive solution.
Amen. I have nothing further, Your Honour. We're done here. Thank you so much to all of you, and thank you to our panel. I thoroughly enjoyed our lively discussion. Thank you all for making yourselves vulnerable and sharing. I really appreciate it. Thank you.